cable or both. But whatever you do, the key thing is that we now have the drive on which we're going to install Linux connected, but the drive on which Windows is installed temporarily disconnected.
That's very cool, and I'm going to watch more of that later. Hello, 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 hello. How the devil are you? Oh. Did I say that with sufficient emphasis? How the devil are you? I do hope you're glad to be here today, because I certainly am. Right, anyway, it's time for the game, which means launch mission. So I'll launch the mission, and I can ask you again, how the devil are you? I asked for a fruity flavour, and I remember, I say I have fond memories. I certainly have memories of using my cousin's vape, and his one, you see, was watermelon flavour. And I thought, oh, well, I should get watermelon flavour. And what do you call it? Got watermelon flavour, but it has a hint of menthol in it, because it certainly tastes like it. I'm well, but I'm going to work shortly. How the god are you? Well, I'm wondering why my frame rate's gone down to 16 frames a second. I imagine it's probably having a think about all those enemies it's going to place on this level, because it said enemy activity, not extremely heavy, swarming plus. So I assume that's a level above extremely heavy. Why would a nice way of saying "how are you" be "how the devil are you"? Why would you invoke such a devilish thing? I don't really know. Anyway, it's taking a while to load, so I'm gonna watch some more of my video. Oh,
Next,
he says as it just loads.
USB drive.
Hey, he's got the same USB key I've got, except his one's in blue and my one's in red. It's a Corsair Voyager Flash, and I like it because it's the fastest USB. I say it's the fastest USB drive. It's not as fast for reading as my Kioxia, but it is good for writing. I can get about 35 megabytes a second sustained write speed. Fat clouds, da 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 da. Fat clouds, da 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 da. I rip fat clouds of vape. Oh no, you're going the wrong way. I wanted him to... Oh, whatever, you know, it's fine. It's fine, look. You've shit the bed, now lay in it. That's the saying, right? It's been a very relaxing day so far. I've done laundry, done the dishes. I've what else have I done? Stayed in bed until 1 in the afternoon. That was good. And oh yeah, and then I did some homework because I had to fill in my timesheet for work, and I was surprised to find I hadn't done in Thursday, but Thursday was a mostly uneventful day. Just I worked a good bit of overtime as well this week, so yeah. Now let's do a rapid deployment. And I can't fire any of those grenades rapidly, so let's go up there. Da, da, da. Walk the dinosaur. Walk the dinosaur. Do, do, do. Open the door, get on the floor. Everybody walk the dinosaur. It's a great song. I love that song. You know what? I'm going to carry on watching this and you can have the audio because I think that'll work
and
well.
power up the PC. And I'm going to press F12 to access this machine's boot menu, where we can see clearly we've got the USB drive available. We've also got our Kingston SSD I've just connected, but we don't have our Windows drive. So we know that the Windows drive has definitely been disconnected from this computer. So let's boot from the USB.
Hang on. His Windows drive was NVMe, so what, are you saying like...
And with the power turned off, I'm going to take this Kingston SSD, which we're going to use as our Linux drive, and I'm going to connect it up with a SATA data cable and power. Next,
Right.
I'm going to temporarily remove the M.2 SSD on which Windows is installed. There we go.
Oh, that's really inconvenient. So you're saying every time you want to switch, you're going to like physically remove the drive. I mean, that's okay if you've got like Windows and Linux on two SSDs and you can rapidly swap them in and out. In fact, why do we bother with M2? Why didn't we... I think there was another standard. Why are we doing these things which are basically supposed to be for laptops, but putting them in desktop PCs? Why don't we have like a proper like, hey, it's like a SATA socket, but it's a bit bigger, and you've got a ribbon cable or what have you, and then you can have your memory, your NVMe drive, but in a more convenient location as opposed to being on the motherboard hidden underneath the graphics card.
Installer, and fast forward on to this point, to installation type. And I think I should point out here that this is what we see in Linux Mint, but you'll see a slightly different screen with similar options in other distros. But if we come back here to Linux Mint, you can see our installation type this time around is limited to either erase disk and install Linux Mint or do something else. There's no option here to install alongside Windows because our Windows drive isn't connected, so Linux can't detect it. And indeed, if you can see an option here for installing alongside Windows, you haven't disconnected your Windows drive. You need to quit out of this, shut down the system, disconnect the drive, and then run up to get back to this point. Anyway, here we are where we can now press Install Now and then confirm what we're doing. And I point out that here the drive we're using is completely blank. It's in a factory state if you just got it out the packet as a new drive. If your drive isn't in that state, do be aware that installing Linux on it will delete everything on the drive, and Linux will probably ask several times for you to confirm you really want to do this. But with the decision made and Linux being installed, we'll fast forward through the rest of the installer. And there we are, it's finished. So if we now restart the computer, remove our USB drive, and the machine should now boot into Linux Mint. And it does, so Linux Mint has been installed on the 2.5-inch SSD. But what about Windows? Well, the next thing I'm going to do is to close down the system and also turn off the power. And it's now time to put our Windows SSD back into the computer. There we go. Or if you have Windows on a 2.5-inch SSD, at this point you need to reconnect its SATA and or power cable. And with this done, we can turn the computer back on, boot up the system, and I'm going to press F12 on this computer to access the BIOS boot menu, where, as you can see, we now have the option to select Windows or Linux. It actually shows Ubuntu here because Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu, but we know that is Linux Mint. But initially I'm going to test Windows still works, so we'll click on Windows. And yes, here we are back in Windows 11. We've still got Windows on the system. And if we want to access Linux, we can do that as well, as I'm sure you would guess. We can just do a restart. press F12 for the BIOS boot menu, and we could here now select Ubuntu, which we know is Linux Mint.
Okay, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. So in other words, you I think the size used as laptops prior. Yeah, 2.5-inch drives were previously used in laptops, but what I meant when I said the NVMe drives is come on, brain, you almost had it. Right, an NVMe drive is just a card. It's similar size to a RAM DIMM, but I want to say it is a laptop standard. Why do I want to say it's a laptop standard? Because because it's small and it fits inside a laptop, so that's why it's used. And with laptops, as space is at a premium, it makes sense that you'd have a socket that just mounts directly into the motherboard. Whereas on the desktop, it would be better if you had some sort of riser cable like you can get for PCI Express, and then you could mount it somewhere else. Or you'd have a PCI Express card which just acts as here is a socket where one can put the your NVMe drive in. Or, and they tend to be quite expensive, so it's a niche usage scenario, you have you have an actual PCI Express SSD. They tend to have a lot of storage and they tend to be very expensive. But yeah, this method, I quite like it. So instead of using Grub as a bootloader, what you do instead is use the actual your BIOS boot menu as your bootloader. So these drives, well, they won't be independent of one another. They'll still see one another, but the bootloader will actually just, it won't be there. So it's just a case of you have to say which drive you're going to load from first. Yeah, okay, that's cool. I like that. I approve.
And I think I'll get rid of this dialog popping up every time we do this. And in fact, let's do another reboot, and this time I'm not going to select the boot menu. We'll just do a straight restart and let it run through, where by default the machine has booted into Windows. So we only have to use the F12 key to access the BIOS boot menu on boot if we want to boot to Linux rather than Windows. However, you might want things the other way around, so let's do a final reboot. Let's restart yet again, and this time I'm pressing the delete key to go into the BIOS. And if we move across here,
your BIOS may well look different.
Boot, you can see we've got boot option priorities. The first one here is Windows, the second is Linux, labelled as Ubuntu, but that is Linux Mint. But if we wanted to boot by default into Linux and access Windows via the BIOS boot menu, we could change this around. We could go boot option number 1, enter. We could set that here to Ubuntu like that. Windows would move to number 2. That's not what I want here. I'm going to put that back to Windows. And if I now save and exit setup like that, there we go. We know that this machine will boot directly back into Windows. And do note here, we're not seeing the Grub boot menu because it's not installed on the Windows drive.
Good.
And a final thing to note is if we no longer want to use Linux on this system, we can simply remove the Linux SSD. And the PC will return to having a single operating system with Windows completely undisturbed.
I think I might try this in future.
We've just set up a PC with Windows on its first SSD, Linux on its second, and the Grub boot menu also on the second, so that it doesn't interfere with Windows. And we achieved this by removing the Windows drive during the Linux installation. However, if you don't want to remove the Windows drive, it's possible to achieve the same result using the Linux installer. To demonstrate, I've returned the second SSD to factory state, which I did using the diskpart command that I've covered in another video. I've also inserted our Linux Mint USB drive, so in the BIOS boot menu we can see our Samsung and Kingston SSDs with Linux no longer installed on the Kingston drive, and we've also got here our USB drive. So let's boot into Linux from the USB, And as usual, I'll do some scaling and then we'll run up the install. And here we now have the option to install Linux alongside Windows, which would place it on our first SSD with a grub boot menu as we saw earlier. And we also have the option still to erase disk and install Linux Mint, which disk of course would have to be determined. And we've also got something else so that we can install Linux on the second SSD with its pesky grub boot menu also on that drive. And as previously I'd point out, what we're going to see here is what you'll see in Linux Mint. It'll look slightly different in other Linux distros, but the principles will be the same. So let's continue, and we can see by default we'll be installing.
God, it feels much later in the day than 5 o'clock.
Windows on it, and we'll be putting the bootloader, including the grub boot menu, also onto that Samsung SSD or Windows drive. And of course, we don't want to do that. So let's straight away change where we're going to put the bootloader to the Kingston SSD there, which we can see is SDA. And if we now also go up here and we scroll down, we can find SDA. We've got an SDA and also an SDB. SDB is the flash drive we're booting from here, but we want SDA, so we'll go up to there. SDA is our Kingston drive like that. But we can't click on install straight away. You'll see install now is grayed out because we need to create a root partition. So we'll go to the free space we have on this drive and click that like that. We're going to mount at the root, which is down there like that, and OK. For some reason the screen moved around again, but never mind, we can go back to there we are, select SDA, and you'll see now we can click on install now. So let's do that, and as usual it checks to see if things are OK, which they are, so we'll continue, and again I'll fast forward through the installer. And here we are once again, it's completed. So
boo! Linux Mint's advertising Netflix on it.
Our USB drive.
Hey, you can be a normie and use Netflix on Linux.
Bootloader and grub boot menu.
How about I don't do that?
SSD. And as a computer reboot, I'm going to press the delete key to take us into the BIOS, because I strongly suspect if we look in boot that yes, Linux has set itself as the first boot option. I'm going to change that back to Windows like that. Linux can be second, and we'll now save and exit and let the machine reboot. And I'm hoping we will now boot directly into Windows without seeing a grub boot menu. And it does indeed look like this is going to be the case. It is! Isn't it great how occasionally we're actually happy to see Windows?
Yeah.
Anyway, what about Linux? Let's test that is working as well. So let's now reboot and hit that F12 to bring up the BIOS boot menu. Here we are, and yes, we've got Ubuntu available as well as
Bongo
Windows,
Linux.
and Ubuntu is listed against the Samsung SSD. Even though we didn't put the Linux bootloader on this drive, part of Grub was still placed there by Linux because it could see the drive, and this is why I always prefer to set up a dual boot by removing the Windows drive rather than doing the method we've just gone through. But this will still work. Let's click on Ubuntu there. And it will now bring up a grub boot menu which includes Windows as well as Linux, because of course the installer could see Windows because we didn't disconnect the drive. But anyway, let's boot into Linux. And here we are, our final Welcome to Linux Mint screen. In my experience, dual drive, dual boot systems are very reliable, and more so than single drive dual boots which rely on a grub boot menu which can become corrupted. So if you need access to two operating systems and a virtual machine doesn't meet your requirements, then a dual drive dual boot is well worth considering. This said, please be aware that no form of dual boot is without its risks, so never set one up of any kind until you've backed everything up and you're fully aware of the risks you are prepared to accept the consequences. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe.
I did like what I saw. Yes, it was very good. I approve of all the things you've said in this thing here. So, you know what's more important than that, though? You know what's more interesting and more important than a way of dual booting, but that doesn't suck, is a Renault 10 with a new engine. A Renault 10 with a new engine bought from Harbour Freight. So we'll go on to browser, and then Yep. Now I'll put the YouTube into it.
This is your brother's house. I was running it fine without...
Okay, maybe not. So instead, let us do a... Yes, I think we can do that. So we'll go... window capture, right? And oh look, it's chosen the right one. Very good. Now, what happens if I make this bit big? Then I can't see the OBS overlay. But then, what if I put OBS over here, and then, yeah, but that fills up the entire screen. So, and now you're gonna be the opposite way around? That's very strange. I don't think I like that. Flip. How do I flip it back to where it was? Oh, right, okay. Anyway, we'll have Robot Cantina there. We'll have the game sort of, I don't know, like, no, there's no good way of shrinking these things, is there? So put Robot Cantina there, like so. Put that there. That'll get the Disney AI going. Oh, what's going on here? Why is he using our IP? But it's not your IP. Right, and now is there a... I know there's a thing in OBS which shows me the chat. View, docs. Chat, there we go. It's a doc. And then I can put that into... I thought I could put this into OBS, but I can't. Anyway. If I minimize OBS, I don't... Never mind. I'll just pretend I'm ignoring the...
So in the previous episode,
Anyway,
we had to make some repairs to the input shaft on the CVT drive system that we're using on our 670cc Predator-powered Renault. Now, since the engine and drive system are already out of the car,
Just double
now
check
would be a great
OBS.
time to fabricate a new exhaust system
Yep,
to
it's
replace
working.
the very restrictive exhaust that came with the engine. And since we're motivated to do stuff, let's also remove the governor from this engine to sharpen up the throttle response. Now let's go over some feedback that I got from the last video where we repaired the input shaft. Now, some of you folks were saying I should add another support bearing to help eliminate flex in the drive line, and that's a great idea, so we're going to do that as well. But first, let's have a look at the exhaust. So this huge muffler that came with this engine is probably fine for most applications as long as the engine's not been modified. But keep in mind, any modifications to this engine absolutely have to begin with getting rid of this muffler. Now this is interesting. This muffler is so big and restrictive, the engine has to be specially tuned in order for it to run efficiently with this muffler. Now of course the size of the jets in the carburetor have to be correctly sized for the muffler, but on this engine they took it one step further and each side of this stock 2-barrel carburetor is tuned differently, and that translates to the jets on each side of the carburetor are different. And from what I can gather, it has something to do with the internal baffles inside the muffler. It's crazy, but in order for them to get this engine to run decent with this muffler, they had to tune each side of the carburetor differently. Now this carburetor will eventually be replaced with something more interesting, but for now we're going to keep it. And in order to get the engine to run properly with the new exhaust, we'll have to modify the jets, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So this being a V-twin engine, I went over to the Harley-Davidson forums and did some research. Apparently, a 2-into-1 exhaust system offers the best performance for the V-twin Harley engine, so that's what we're going to fabricate for this V-twin Predator engine. Now of course equal length header pipes would be ideal, but due to the difficulty of fabricating equal length headers, well, that ain't going to happen on this build. Our goal is simple, and all we need to do is to get both pipes to merge into a collector, and from that point the exhaust will exit the vehicle in a single pipe. Some of you folks may be disappointed that we're not going to run twin exhaust pipes for that iconic raw V-twin sound. There's another reason we're going to fabricate a 2-into-1 exhaust, and that is so we can put a wideband sensor in the collector so we can measure the air-fuel ratio, and that will allow us to tune the stock carburetor and whatever carburetor we decide to use in the future. So let's take a quick look at the raw material that we're going to use to make the exhaust system on this engine. I kind of cheated, and off camera I worked out the details, well, because it makes me look smarter. Now, this exhaust ain't going to be perfect as far as maximizing every ounce of power this engine can produce. Nope, it's going to be a compromise. But it'll be heaps better than the garbage can type muffler that the engine came with. Now this, and these came with an El Cheapo do-it-yourself header kit that I got on the Jungle site for 39 bucks. Here, let's take a better look. Yeah, these are the basic components that I used, and it's a decent value for the money. For the collector, well, we're going to use this thing, and believe it or not, it's better than anything I can build. If you're wondering, it's a fancy exhaust tip that you can put on a crummy little car to make it look cooler, I guess. It's nearly the perfect size for what we need, and they did an excellent job blending all three pipes together. The only issue is, the 1.25" primary pipe doesn't exactly fit precisely, so I machined up a set of bushings to fill in the gap. Now these bushings are actually shaft collars, and to open up the centers, well, I chucked them in the lathe and bored them out for a perfect fit. Anyway,
feels like a game of snooker, just lining up everything just right.
We need, so let's take a look at how they all fit together. Fast forward a bit, and we have the exhaust loosely assembled on
Oh yeah, Americans like to say forward, don't they?
To ensure a perfect fit.
Forward.
Oh yeah, don't worry. Once the exhaust is fully welded, it'll get wrapped to help reduce the temperatures in the engine bay. The first two things that need to be welded are the flanges to the head pipes, and that'll make it a lot easier to get everything lined up for final welding. Fast forward a bit, and the flanges are welded to the head pipes. Now, to be clear, I actually removed these pipes and welded them off the engine, and I also welded these bushings from the backside onto the head pipes. For the next few welds that we need to do, we need to have the exhaust assembled on the engine, and that guarantees a perfect fit. Now at this point, there's still plenty of wiggle room to get everything to line up correctly. Alright, let's put the final tack welds on this setup. Now that everything's been tack welded in place, I can take the exhaust off the engine and fully weld all the bits. This should be fun. Fast forward a few minutes and the exhaust is completely welded and painted. Now I still have to weld in a bung for the wideband sensor. However, I needed to fit the exhaust to the engine to determine the best location on the collector for the sensor. Anyway, I'll do that off camera. Now right here I'm using a simple splice clamp to attach the tailpipe.
Splice
this
clamp?
gives me a lot of options for additional modifications in the future.
The splice may flow.
Completed the majority of the exhaust system, it's time to move on and have a look at removing the governor. In order to gain access to the governor, we're going to have to open up the engine, and that means we need to drain the oil. It's a shame this oil only has about 100 miles on it, but perhaps it's a good time to get rid of the break-in oil, so I guess this is a good thing. The governor on an engine like this is a simple mechanical feedback device that holds the engine at a set RPM range. The reason we're removing it is to get a faster throttle response. The governor can be a bit slow to react to throttle inputs, and this should help out quite a bit. Now, contrary to popular belief, removing the governor doesn't increase engine power. It only lets the engine rev higher, and in a lot of cases, removing the governor will also increase the risk of damaging the engine. So as you can see, the throttle connects through a series of linkages to a shaft that goes inside the engine. So we'll need to open up the engine and remove a few bits in order to disable the governor. So let's zip off a few bolts and remove the side cover on this engine. Now if you're careful, a lot of the time the side cover gasket can be salvaged and reused. However, as a precaution, I already purchased a new gasket and have it on hand in case I damage this gasket. And it looks like I did damage the gasket, so it's a good thing I have a brand new gasket sitting in a box just waiting to be installed. So here's the governor gear thingy. Here, let me show you how it works. So when this thingy is spinning really fast, well, this button pops out and pushes against this lever, and this is what pulls the throttle back to reduce the engine speed. Now, it may be a bit more complicated than that, but that's the basics.
Clever.
So what we're going to do is remove this gear, and we're going to cut this part of the governor shaft off. That way, we'll eliminate a lot of the moving parts, and we can still use the governor shaft as a pivot point for the throttle linkage. You see, with this spoon appendage cut off, we don't have to fabricate a completely new throttle linkage, which is definitely a bonus. So this is not necessarily a tutorial on modifying the governor on a 670cc engine. However, after watching a few other YouTube videos, I believe we capture some details others don't show. The governor shaft can now be removed from the engine block, and more often than not, there's another washer that will stick to the engine block and won't come out with the shaft, so you have to fish that out with your fingers. So this shaft wants to be cut right about here, and that's what we're going to do. A little cleanup takes the burrs off the shaft, and it's ready to be put back in the engine. This is the washer I mentioned earlier and tends to stick to the engine block. Obviously, we retrieved it, now it can go back on the shaft like so. And there we go. The shaft is back in the engine and the throttle linkage remains fully functional. Let's take a look at the rest of the governor. So this little gear thingy has to be removed. Now, most people use brute force and rip this gear apart with pliers and whatnot, and that works, but it can also take a long time to nibble away at this gear. So the fastest way to remove it is to punch the gear shaft out of the engine cover. And that's pretty quick. Now, that introduces another problem, and that is now we have a hole in the cover. So the common practice is not to pound the shaft back into the case. Instead, the hole can be tapped for a 1/4x20 bolt to block off the opening. And of course, Loctite should be applied to the bolt threads. But before we do anything, let's vacuum up any metal that may have gotten into the case by the threading process. And then we give the cover a shot of brake parts cleaner to remove any oil that may have gotten onto the threads. Now a bit of Loctite on the bolt, and then we can screw it into the cover. At this point, we can now reassemble the engine. So let's get that brand new gasket we have. So this is the brand new gasket that I bought in the event we damaged the old gasket.
It doesn't fit.
And it doesn't fit. So this is every YouTuber's nightmare. You see, videos are made on a nearly impossible deadline, and there's no time for mistakes. Something like this is devastating and pretty much shuts down the whole process. So a new gasket was ordered. However, there was no chance this video was going to be finished in time.
So that's why there was a
We
delay.
got creative. So look, the car's running and driving, and all is well. Even sounds good too. Now, some of you are thinking, Jimbo, that's just a toy car on a treadmill. You can't fool us. Well, it was worth a shot. Okay, if you paid attention to the title on this video, it says episode 24 and 25. And that's because we couldn't finish episode 24 for obvious reasons. Anyway, while we waited for the new gasket to arrive, we went ahead and fabricated an additional support bearing for the input shaft, and that brings us to a total of 3 bearings to support this shaft. Now, one of the reasons we didn't do this right away
like not
is
having
it
to
makes
talk.
changing the CVT belt infinitely harder, but through some clever engineering,
Just
we
let-
were able to make
let
this
them
bearing
eng-
easily
let the engineering
removable
man
to allow
talk.
for some semi-easy belt changes. So on this carbureted 670cc engine, we're going to try something different when tuning the carburetor. And that is, we're going to use this wideband air fuel gauge to monitor the mixture. This rig is something I built many years ago, and it's more or less a self-contained portable wideband system. All it needs is 12 volts and of course a place in the exhaust system to screw this sensor in. Anyway, it's nothing special. It's just an AEM wideband kit with a few enclosures for terminal blocks and whatnot. I reckon this kit will take some of the guesswork out of tuning the carburetor. Well, to a certain extent. You see, the air-fuel mixture that works on automotive engines doesn't exactly work well on an air-cooled industrial engine. And from my experience, these little air-cooled engines run stronger when you run them on the rich side. Anyway, that's my method of tuning. You're free to tune your air-cooled engine any way you want, but in the end you'll find they like a little extra fuel. So after a few days, the correct gasket arrived and we started the process of putting the car back together. This side cover uses a handful of bolts that hold it into position. Now, 2 of these bolts are actually longer than the rest, and the longer bolts go here. Since the side cover is part of the engine block, the bolts should be torqued to spec, and that ensures the block isn't stressed by over-torquing the bolts. Eventually we reached the point where the engine could go back in the car. Now this engine cradle doesn't weigh very much, but it's awkward to handle and using an engine hoist is a bit overkill. However, it certainly makes things a lot easier, especially when bolting the cradle to the transmission. So with the cradle in place, we had one more thing to fix, and that's the transmission side mounts that are located here and here. These mounts don't really do much as far as holding the transmission up, and it seems like the broken ones actually work fine. But I'm told that these mounts help transfer the suspension,
my friend bequeathed, I want to say bequeathed, he's still alive.
Still available for
He's not dead.
Pair.
My friend gave unto me his vape, so I got some watermelon fluid for it, and I'm puffing away on that. Quite enjoy it.
Anyway, it turns out that the motor mounts from a 1963 Triumph TR4 are the right thickness and are only $8 a pop from Moss Motors. And with a few minor modifications, they'll actually fit fine. Well, good enough for a Predator-powered 1969 Renault. The only permanent modification we had to do was drill a clearance hole in the frame bracket, but who cares if the car's not 100% original, right? Fast forward a few hours and the engine's back in the car and ready to be started. But before we do that, let's take a look at a few things. Over here you can see the exhaust system's been wrapped with titanium cloth, and I'll tell you, this stuff is nasty to work with. It has to be soaked in water and installed wet, which ain't so bad. But there are sharp thingies in this wrap that poke into your skin, and they're impossible to see to remove with tweezers. Anyway, if you're looking to wrap your exhaust anytime soon, wear a pair of rubber gloves for sure. Now, since we're running the wideband sensor, we really need to be able to charge the battery, so I went ahead and finished the alternator wiring. And here's the best part. I watched one of my old videos on how to wire a 20 amp alternator, but truth be told, all you really need to do is look at the video thumbnail. It has the complete schematic right there.
I too love me watermelons.
Let's go ahead and
eat that watermelon, eat that watermelon, eat that watermelon. Sure tastes good. Look at that. I love the interior of this car. So let me go back a bit.
10-cent tour. Let's go ahead and start the engine and see if we can find some new problems.
Right, okay, see, you can't see where my mouse cursor is pointing at, can you? I don't think that shows up on OBS. But look at it, you've got nice wide open space, some interesting bits of wrap. It's great, it's everything you need in the car. You don't need more than that in the car. It's perfect. I love it. Absolutely love it. Would love to have a go driving a car like that. Oh yeah, that sounds like a Harley. Actually, holy shit, it's a Harley.
Well, it runs, but it sounds like it's running lean when I goose the throttle. So the idle on this engine is a lot higher than what you'd expect on something like a Harley engine, and there's a reason for that. You see, there's a compression relief mechanism on this engine to help the starter crank the engine over, and that compression relief mechanism will cause the engine to stall if the idle is set too low. So, unfortunately, we won't get that iconic Harley sound at idle. Let's take a look at that air fuel meter. The mixture looks okay at idle. Let's see what happens when I rev the engine. Yeah, it's running a little bit lean, but it's good enough for now. Let's see how the clutch works this time around.
I love it.
She grabs pretty good.
I love it.
Unfortunately, I still haven't fixed reverse, so let's try this again with the car pointed in a better direction.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's an engine to annoy your neighbours with.
In first gear, the car launches hard and it's as smooth as butter. So it looks like the issue with the clutch chatter has been solved. Now, the only problem with first gear is, well, you pretty much have to shift into second gear right away, which is normal on a normal car, but this ain't a normal car, and we really don't need first gear, if that makes any sense.
That engine certainly will provoke I imagine he'll put a silencer on it at some point. But this is just to check that everything's working. I mean, God, can you imagine, like, oh, I'm going to do a 2-hour drive in this.
Whoops, I missed a gear.
God, look at that, cutting into the corners. That's terrible steering. But who cares?
There we go. I'm kind of old school, and I like big blocks. There's nothing like a 396 and an M21 4-speed for that classic raw American power. Now, this car, well, it ain't got none of that, but it feels raw and it feels powerful, so I'm really digging it.
Oh, you're doing 51 miles an hour? It's fine.
So now I'm keeping an eye on the air-fuel mixture, and it's kind of in the neighborhood. But remember earlier in the video, I mentioned that the 2-barrel carburetor on this engine is tuned differently for each cylinder. So even though we're seeing reasonable numbers, it may be that one cylinder's running rich and the other one's running lean. It's hard to say. At some point, we'll have to dig into the carburetor and balance out the jets. Now this is kind of a stupid question, but has anybody noticed the car's extremely loud? Yeah, I kind of figured it would be, being it doesn't have a muffler of any kind. Now I'm thinking we're going to have to put a muffler on it, perhaps something from a sport bike, and that should take the bark out of this exhaust sound. Anyway, the car feels a lot faster, and to be on the safe side, I'm holding back on the throttle, so don't worry, this car's a lot faster than what you're seeing on video.
Nice.
Just for giggles, let's do a 0 to 55 acceleration run, and the time to beat today is 51 seconds. Now, keep in mind we haven't done any carburetor tuning yet, and without a tachometer, I'm not going to push it too hard. I just want to get an idea of what's going on, because the car feels faster, and perhaps we may be able to see a difference in the way the car accelerates. If you're new to the channel, welcome aboard. So obviously the car has been modified with a 2-cylinder lawnmower engine, and on top of that we're running both a CVT type torque converter and a 4-speed manual transmission. The CVT type torque converter multiplies the engine's torque, and if we put the transmission in 3rd gear, well, mathematically with the CVT, it's equivalent to putting the transmission into 1st gear. It's all in the math and the way the CVT works. So today we ain't gonna start off in 3rd gear, although we could. Anyway, we're gonna start off in 2nd gear and let the CVT do all the work to about 30 miles per hour. Then we'll start shifting the transmission. Now, if you want to know why we're using a CVT instead of a regular clutch, well, we covered that in Season 3, Episode 18, but the short story is the engine can't handle the thrust loads a conventional clutch would put on the crankshaft. Check out Episode 18 if you want to learn more. So once again, the time to beat is 51 seconds. Let's do this.
Hell yeah.
Not too shabby. We shaved 12 seconds off the 0 to 55. Now let's see how long it takes for this thing to get to 60 miles per hour. Alright, good or bad, it doesn't really matter. Keep in mind, this is an 1,800-pound car with a lawnmower engine, and it got to 60 in less than a day. We can definitely improve on that for sure. Let's head back to the workshop. Okay, just for fun, let's take this corner in 4th gear and let the CVT drive do all the work.
That's doing it. That's certainly doing it. Engine's not stalling and it's not getting chunky.
So, not so great, but it did do it. Also, keep in mind, I'm holding back on the throttle because I really need a tachometer to get an idea where the RPMs are at. Now, I do have a tachometer back at the shop, and it's one of those cheapo tachs made for lawnmower engines. They work okay, but since the engine's about 6 feet from the dashboard of this car, I have to extend the wires, and I'm not sure how that'll affect the tachometer. It should work, but you never know. So before I can fiddle around with the carburetor jets, I need to figure out what muffler we're going to use on this car. Now on these small engines, the muffler will directly affect what size jets I need to use in the carburetor, so it's best to figure out the exhaust before we start modifying the carburetor. Anyway, I have a few sport bike type mufflers on order and they should arrive by tomorrow. But this video has to be uploaded tomorrow. I reckon we had some fun today and the car is back on the road. Now keep in mind, I held back on the throttle and we still managed to shave 12 seconds off the 0 to 55 time, which is outstanding. Even though the car is faster, well, it ain't fast, but it's fun to drive. If you're not subscribed already, please consider subscribing.
I hope those
It's
windscreen
free,
wipers
and it
work.
makes a big difference in what projects we can do. Now, this 670cc Predator powered Renault is far from being done, and I feel it needs to go faster. How much faster? Well, tune in next time and find out. Thanks for watching, and until next time.
Yeah, anyway. Good car, bad idea.
Hello everybody, if you've clicked on today's video, for which I thank you, chances are, like myself, you're a bit of a Jag fan. However, it is sadly impossible to deny the fact that the company does seem to be in a lot of trouble. Their model lineup is becoming increasingly sparse, and those which remain are getting on now. It is also now ever more apparent that their electric revolution is having a little bit of trouble getting out of the starting gate, and it feels like the firm is only one minor corporate restructuring away from becoming a trim level for Land Rover. And if that were to be the case, I think it would be a tragedy, not just for Britain as a whole, but also for car fans across the world. Jaguar is a brand with an amazingly rich heritage of both road and race cars, but even more than that, only 20 years ago, it seemed to be in its strongest position yet, ready to take on the 21st century with a renewed vigour. How then have Jaguar managed this in 2 decades to go from being at their absolute best to the point of near extinction? Well, I've been giving this a lot of thought recently, and I believe you can trace the beginning of Jaguar's downfall to the release of this, the X-Type. But was it really that bad? And what did Jaguar actually do wrong anyway? Well, that's complicated. Let's begin by talking about what the X-Type actually is. I'm going to discuss the car in isolation, and then we will get on to the topic at hand. What exactly went wrong, and how it really has contributed to the downfall of Jaguar, and why I think actually this is a lesson that many other companies out there really need to pay close attention to. So, the X-Type was one of the first cars launched by Jaguar under the stewardship of Ford when it was part of what they called their Premier Automotive Group. This was an association that ran essentially from the late 90s to the late noughties, and it included not just Jaguar, but also Volvo, Aston Martin and Land Rover. It was under Ford's ownership that Jaguar and Land Rover were essentially bolted together, and this is a topic I'm going to revisit in a little bit, because it's very important. Now, by this point, Ford had actually been involved with Jaguar for quite some time, having first shown an interest in the company in the 1980s. Come the 1990s, and it was a more formal relationship, and the money had started flowing. The first fruit of this relationship was the revised XJ, dubbed the X300. It was essentially an evolution of the XJ40 platform, but with all the bugs kind of ironed out, and the investment given to it that it really should have had in the first place. Ford, it seemed, was certainly very happy in the early days to splash the cash, spending money on upgrading facilities, giving Jaguar newer, more modern production techniques in order for them to be a more successful business. All well and good. The first brand new car came in the late 90s in the form of the very retro-styled S-Type, which, though
Love
did
it.
divide opinion in
Have
terms of
one.
looks, was actually a very good car indeed, and one that I actually have a real soft spot for on account of the fact that my dad had one. Shamefully, I talked him out of an XJR into the S-Type, and I'll never live that down, but anyway. Then, next up was the X-Type, and this really was where things got a little bit interesting, because Ford decided that Jaguar had to sell more cars. A lot more cars. Their aim was to double the output of the firm, and the X-Type is how they were going to do it. And this was a big deal because it was the first time Jaguar going to that part of the market, competing directly with fleet favourites like the BMW 3 Series, the Audi A4 and the Mercedes C-Class.
Oh,
as well as,
cloth
no doubt,
seats,
your
okay.
Vauxhall and Ford here and there. One of the reasons that I'm particularly glad to be driving this exact car is that it shows you what a mixed up cookie an early X-Type was. I have previously experienced the platform before, but that was a later 2005 with the diesel engine. This shows you what exactly buyers were faced with when the car was launched in sort of 2001 up until about 2003. In some ways, you can very clearly see that Jaguar were trying to produce something a little more cost conscious. So you have a fabric interior and, unbelievably, windy windows in the back too. I must also say I
Amazing.
am extremely impressed by the condition of this particular car. Many X-Types out there, on account of the fact they've been cheap for so long, aren't all that great. But this one is spectacular. Mantis has done a little bit of work to the car, replaced the drive belt, renewed a few things, sorted a little bit of paintwork, so on and so forth. But generally speaking, it's as he got it. And the reason for the condition? Well, it's on just 45,000 miles, but more than that, until he got it, it had had just one owner for 21 years. And it really does feel like a car that's been owned and loved from new. And you can also see plenty of areas where Jaguar really did put the effort in to make sure this still felt like a more upmarket car. So you have air conditioning, you have a CD changer, you've got real wood veneers, and a very plush ride. This car really does feel like a Jag should. It's comfortable, beautifully damped. No, not quite as sophisticated as some others, but you've got to remember, it was an entry-level model for the firm made 2 decades ago. Even so, in 2023, this is a lovely thing.
In road surface grey,
There were
though.
still a couple of key issues with the X-Type, the early ones in particular, that showed you just how little experience Jaguar had in the segment. Of course, just about any puffball worth their salt will be keen to tell you when you mention an X-Type that it is just a Mondeo in a fancy frock. But the fact is, that's not really true at all. Yes, it's spun off the same platform that gave us the 3rd generation Mondeo, but first off, that's a really good car, and secondly, so much re-engineering went into this that by the time it was done, only 19% of parts were actually shared between the two. And the majority of those were things under the skin that you'd never see anyway and would have been utterly daft for Jaguar to have come up with themselves. So I don't really think that's a problem. But in order to try and distance itself from the likes of Ford, Jaguar decided that the car at launch would come exclusively with a V6 petrol engine and all-wheel drive. I reckon the latter was on account of the fact that by default this is a front-wheel drive platform, and later on, when Jaguar did a 2-wheel drive variant of the car, it was front-wheel drive. That would have almost certainly ruled out any potential BMW or Mercedes owner from wanting one, and is likely why Jaguar were so keen to develop their all-wheel drive system, and more than that, give it a slightly rearward bias. By default, this car sends 60% of its torque to the rear wheels. The V6 bit, though, is the trickier one. Up until this point, Jaguar had chiefly been using either 6 or 8 cylinders, so the presence of a 6 in the car wasn't really anything unusual at all. But in this segment, in Europe, a 6-cylinder would certainly have been considered a premium engine option, with the vast majority of buyers going for either a 4 or a diesel. neither of which Jaguar offered you for the first few years. In fact, the car never received a 4-cylinder petrol. It wasn't until 2003 it got a diesel of any description, and bizarrely, it wasn't until 2008, just a year before the car was discontinued, you could have actually had your diesel with an automatic. And that to me shows that they ignored one enormous and crucially important audience for this car: fleet buyers. Any car in this segment 20 years ago had to appeal not just to individuals but companies as well. And whilst the person who works at a company might want themselves a Jag, the fact is, if you're doing a lot of miles, an automatic is a nice thing to have, and if you can't make the numbers on paper work, the person who controls the cash isn't going to let you have one. And that almost certainly contributed to why Jaguar sold just 350,000 of them over 8 years, as opposed to the 800,000 that they had predicted. But in spite of all that, it was still Jaguar's biggest selling car to date. Why then is it today considered a massive failure? Is it because it was a bad car? Well, no. You only need to look at the reviews of it in period to find that actually the people who drove it really liked it. And even in 2023, right here, right now, I'll happily tell you, there are a lot of reasons to buy yourself an X-Type. Mantis is actually a relatively new driver. He's 29 but didn't get his license until fairly recently. His first car was an R56 Mini, which he still has, but he decided he wanted something a little more luxurious. He'd actually spotted an X-Type a few years before and thought, wow, that's a nice looking proper Jaguar, but then saw the prices and thought, well, there must be something wrong with them. When he got his license and wanted something a little nicer for himself, he thought, you know what, I'll look into that Jaguar again, and he read the reviews and, like I did, came to the conclusion that, well, they seem pretty decent. He is presently very happy with his purchase, and despite having to get used to the size of it, it's got only rear parking sensors, not front, he's really been enjoying it. This car has the 2.5 litre version of the Ford-derived V6, which has some Jaguar-specific things, like variable valve timing. You could have also got it in a 3 litre, where it made 231 horsepower, but here it still makes a reasonable 193. That figure does stick in my head because I seem to recall many BMWs of the time making exactly the same, and I think it was a German insurance thing or something weird like that. Torque is 180 pound-foot, the gearbox I've already discussed and is lovely, but you could also have these with a manual, and if you do fancy a modern Jaguar where you can row your own gears, the X-Type is really one of your very few options.
My S-Type's manual.
The steering is typical. Jaguar has a little bit of weight to it, but it's still on the light side. Talks to you though, you've got a very good idea of what the chassis is doing, and though it's not exactly a mountain goat or agile like a terrier, it's still a fine thing to hustle down a road such as this. Really does feel like a Jag. So what's the problem then? Well, I think it's a philosophical one. This car is to me perhaps the prime example of how easy it is to get something wrong when you're trying to build a group of companies. In isolation, this car is perfectly fine. But the sort of person who would want a Jag is more likely to have wanted an XJ or perhaps an S-Type. And the sort of person who wants a more affordable, more economical car isn't going to want to put up with a V6. Jaguar's idea, by the way, of trying to economise it was to introduce a 2.1 litre version that it won't surprise you to hear drinks, I think, just as much as this, which is already not great at sort of high 20s MPG. We're not exactly sure, there isn't really much of a trip computer in here. Well, any sort of trip computer really, barring the usual distance counter. I think the only company in history which has really semi-successfully managed to get a stack of brands that are still fairly close together to make sense is VW. We all know the hierarchy. You've got your Seat and Skoda here, you've got VW here, Audi here, Bentley, Porsche, Lamborghini and Bugatti. It all makes sense, and the cars still sell, despite the fact that we know they're quite related. Having this share some of its parts with the Mondeo, I think didn't do it any favours whatsoever, because in Britain and in the USA, VW is considered a fairly premium brand. So when you say your Audi shares parts with a Golf, it's not really much of an issue. But to say your Jag has Ford underpinnings, that I think is problematic in the heads of many people. And from my perspective, if you want a cheaper car, why don't you just buy the Mondeo? Surely that's the sensible thing to do. And this, I think, is really a big issue that we're all facing now. You see, 20, 30 years ago, you went to the brand based on the type of car that you needed. So, for example, if you wanted yourself a luxurious saloon, you'd go to Jaguar, Lexus, BMW, Mercedes, or the like. If you wanted yourself a fun, sporty little hatchback, it would be a Ford or a Vauxhall. If you wanted yourself an off-roader, you'd go to Land Rover or, say, Toyota for a cruiser. But in the last few years, the world has gone nuts for not just hatchbacks, but more specifically SUVs. And by Jaguar being bolted to the side of Land Rover, it's created a bit of a problem. On the one hand, you'd have thought this was absolute gold because they've got access to what are considered some of the best 4x4s in the world. However, they've never really capitalised upon that. I expect part of it is going to be a protectionist policy on the part of Land Rover, but the fact is, the Land Rover and Range Rover brands have become known for making that kind of car.
The two companies being related also meant that in many cases their dealerships were on the same sites, if not even in the same building. So if you were looking for an SUV and thought about a Jaguar, chances are you'd wind up looking at a Range Rover anyway. In recent reports, JLR admitted that it was the new Defender and Range Rover lines that were really pushing sales. Presently, Land Rover products outsell Jaguar by a margin of around 5-1, clearly unsustainable. And it does not take long before the spiral of reducing budgets and cutting quality to make up for that loss comes in, and that's a terminal process which is almost irreversible.
Jaguar, meanwhile, are known for saloons. The fact is, saloons just aren't in vogue. They did, however, manage to have quite some success with the XK and latterly the F-Type, which I think did brilliantly for the company, not just in terms of sales, but also image. Why then has the F-Type not been given an immediate electric successor? Maybe it will soon, but really, it should have been out already. Take the wind out of Porsche's sails with the new electric Boxster. Give us something exciting with a Jaguar badge on that we can buy. And I think the problem that Jaguar had under their Ford ownership is that the only way companies like Ford can think is big. As far as they're concerned, success is more cars, more money, more profit margins. It's just not a good way for certain companies to do business. Why do you think Ferrari don't tell people how many cars they make anymore? It's because they don't want to admit it's more than they used to. They maintain the illusion of Ferraris being a relatively scarce thing. It's how they make sure they're still perceived as being special. And that to me is how Jaguar should be. If it doesn't have to stand on its own 2 feet, if it can be part of a larger company, Ford, Tata, or whoever the hell wants to own it, let Jaguar be the arm that's there to make nice, luxurious things. The arm that doesn't really have to make too much money but does its own thing. It makes the products feel more special and therefore allows you to ask more money for them. And this is important because with a company like Jaguar, it should be about profit margins and not sales numbers. Sadly, Ford, I'm not sure really have ever thought that way. It actually took a whole 5 years for this car to get a successor at all, which arrived in the form of the XE, and in some ways I think they actually made the opposite mistakes. The car was in some ways much more advanced, had a new aluminium architecture, was a very, very cool thing, but very soon in, they discontinued the V6 engine, leaving you with only a turbocharged 4-cylinder as the top of the line. And who wants that in a Jag? Nobody. The company really heavily invested in both the Chinese market and diesel, which 10 years ago looked like the sensible bets. Unfortunately, neither turned out to be that way, and they're really, really paying the price for it. What they're going to do about it, I really don't know, and in some ways, actually Jaguar just becoming a trim for Land Rover is probably the most sensible way of keeping the brand alive. It is also the last thing that myself and just about any other card-carrying petrolhead would want to see. The lesson for other companies to learn? Well, it's a big one, and I'm currently seeing it happening over at Stellantis, where it would appear that they're insisting on every single company under their brand having an SUV of some description. Case in point, Maserati. The last 2 cars they've announced are the MC20 supercar, which is over £200,000, £300,000 if you go nuts and want the drop-top version. And
it's a video about the X-Type, so that's why I'm watching it. I've always liked the X-Type. My dad's old boss had one. I thought it was a very cool car. It is a very cool car.
Nearly across the board is
but I got an S-Type.
All racing to make exactly the same car. And it seems unfortunate that just about every car company under the sun, with very, very few exceptions, seems happy to chuck out the family silverware and burn their heritage in the pursuit of sales. And I think that is a real tragedy, because the one thing I'm really, really trying to fight against, what little good I can do, is the car as a white good. And I'm sure you've all seen that meme floating about of, oh look, all cars are the same, aren't they? Which I think is a little bit misleading. But in any case, I don't want all cars to be the same, and I don't want all manufacturers to make the same things. And when they were all individual, I could kind of understand them all wanting a piece of the same pie. But they're not. They're part of bigger entities, so use it. Do proper brand work. Make a badge mean something again. Please. Please.
I haven't seen the Grand Tour in years.
I want a really expensive Fiat. It's just not how it works.
It's a nice shot.
There's a reason that BMW have Mini and Rolls-Royce, because they know they can't charge Rolls-Royce money for a BMW, and they don't want to sell a BMW for Mini money. And it's that thinking which, unfortunately, hasn't really done Jaguar any favours at all. If you know the history of the company, you'll know it never really sold that many cars. It never really did financially that well. But it built an image. And if it loses that, it really won't have anything. So that's a half review, half talk, half rant. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have,
the project cars, the 7 and the 8 are
thanks to Mantis for bringing this car
spectaculous.
out. And as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button,
I think
comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already.
If I had to, like, you know, it was like, I'm getting a new Jag and it has to be a Jag. And for some reason I can't get like an XJ 308. The 308 is the XJ, but it's an aluminium chassis. But I'd be tempted with the X300s, because then I'd be able to talk Mark Hewitt and Mark Halliwell. I keep thinking of him as Mark Hewitt. Clarkson and Co. Kipping digs at Brexit. I didn't know that. That's sad. But let me have a look. Anything else I want here? Oh yes, this is what's this? A 2-second long video. Well done. Can't remember his name. We had him on 40 words now and then.
So as you will no doubt know, it's a bit of a meme, long-running meme, that English and British food is rubbish. And you know, all you need to do is search British food, and you'll find pages upon pages of articles deriding English and British food for being disgusting and, oh, why do they eat that? And I am here to set the record straight.
Good, because I've seen what the foreigners eat.
Well, yeah, this is anti-English propaganda. And we need to amend this. So first of all...
Oh, you eat bones on toast? Yeah? You boil dogs alive.
So, let's begin with the case against English food, okay? So, the sort of city-dwelling, avocado-eating, latte-sipping, metropolitan elite types, the attitude among them tends to be that food has to be exotic to be good. That's what qualifies.
How's the game going?
And that is
it's all right. Yeah, I mean,
that attitude is summarised in this meme here.
Bring it to the forefront. You can have a look. There we go.
Why is my food so bland without multiculturalism?
Oh, you know what?
This is the
as we're on the main bit of it.
Yeah, no, I know, and I hate this attitude. Because it's like, look, you actually can go to the shop and buy any spices that you like.
I mean, food is literally a fungible good. There are these things called recipe books.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, we literally used to import spices back from all over the world.
Yeah. But again, the attitude that to just like the foreign is just an unvarnished good. You know, the exotic, the strange, that's what qualifies something as being worth your time. And I hate this attitude. So the next one along, again, it's the same attitude. You know, spice equals good. Spicy equals delicious.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a thesis on this because obviously
he's got feces on this.
Sargon
third dirty man.
The woman online, and it's like, right, okay. And so I've been thinking about this because I've been watching loads of these videos. Now, watch this one of this black American guy.
Hi, people, and today I've been making
It
disappointment.
just seems to be totally indiscriminate, just like tons of stuff. And I'm like, right, okay. But if you eat that every single day, you're going to become habituated to that.
Yeah.
You're going to need the spiciest food you can have for you to even be able to taste it. In the same way that an alcoholic has to drink more and more and more each day to get drunk.
It's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
And this is something
Roasted
that I think
bone
actually
marrow.
speaks to
Yeah, I'll
virtue about
well, I
the
mean, it's
character
good in
of
a
food.
soup. I don't
Actually,
know about
our food,
roasted,
it's
but
not
I
actually
imagine it'll be
black.
good.
It's, we use salt and pepper and various, whatever else. It's so we don't go crazy with it.
It's subtle.
Also we don't use it on every single meal. And so when you actually have
But
something that's
Sargon is Lawrence
it's
Fishburne
not
black.
tasty,
Yeah.
but
I
then
wouldn't
the other food we
know.
have is also good.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll go on at length another time.
Sargon,
But
does
this-
your daddy
I'm
give you a
totally convinced
boner?
Essentially, they have destroyed their own palates.
Yeah, well, I
by
think
doing this.
that's right. Yeah, and again, it's something that's often said is the English attitude to food is to prioritize high quality ingredients, and that's
Yes.
where the flavor comes from, not
Yes.
caking it in.
Yes.
Asda shop or pre-mixed seasoning.
But no, that's exactly right because
Yeah.
and that's
Lowry
been for a long time.
seasoned
I've got
salt.
a book club on a book called The English Are They Human?
Oh, I remember.
By
Yeah.
this Dutch professor, and he was like, actually, one of the things he noticed was actually English food is good. It's just the meat is always insanely high quality.
Yeah.
And so the English have this habit of going, well, what meat is it? What did you have? You say, I had lamb.
Yeah.
What did you have? I had pork. You don't say I had cheese or carrots or anything like that. You say you just tell people what meat you're
Yeah,
having
yeah.
because English meat was always insanely high quality. And like we're just in the habit. And so like I don't need loads of spices to
Yeah.
enjoy this pork joint.
Well, you think the Sunday roast, the centerpiece is always the meat.
Exactly.
You say on Sunday I had beef.
Yeah.
You didn't literally just have beef.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I did the carnivore diet for about a year, so there
But
were
most
occasions.
people just assume
Yeah.
of course you have veg and everything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But the meat, that's the important part. But the point is, it's the way it's cooked and the way the high quality.
Much
meat
like a plot in the
means you
porn
don't
film,
need
you
to
know
burn
it needs to be there, but
Yeah, exactly,
nobody's
yeah.
really
But
interested
good,
about the
the next
carrots
one,
you had in your
as well.
plate.
Again, same attitude.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, nothing wrong with that. Sure, it's not the most flattering picture. Let's say the lighting's not great.
No.
It doesn't.
But you mash up the potatoes and mix them into the gravy and the mince,
Yeah.
and that's actually tastes good.
Yeah, and moreover,
That's shepherd's
a
pie.
very
It's
nutritious
delicious.
meal,
I
that.
bet it is.
And that's something else that I'm going to talk about.
And it also means that we don't have to worry about the germs flying overhead. Have you seen the American eating beans on toast for the first time?
No, I haven't.
Oh my god! I wish I'd known that you were going to do this. So I'd have got there's this video of this just sort of 20-year-old American guy. I hear they eat beans on toast in
Yeah.
Britain, and so he makes the toast, he butters it, he pours the beans on it, and then he just gets it. Okay, bites it, and then he's just chewing. He's like, actually, this is really good.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it is actually.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised, and if you put a bit of cheese on it and melt the cheese on top of it, man,
Cheese
it's so
beano.
good. But like,
Well, that's the funny thing is, if you do look at some of these articles that do deride English food as being gross and bland and that sort of thing, always comes from Americans.
yeah. But again, I think their palate is just bastardized.
Yeah.
I really think so. Anyway,
Indeed, and again, the American food is, well, very different in character to English food, in my view.
American food is gross, actually. The amount of calories in
Yeah.
American food is just wild.
Never mind the calories in American food, the poison in American food. There's stuff in American food which is not food.
And we'd gone to just a restaurant, and I was thinking, right, okay, I don't want to overeat, so I'll get a salad. I looked at the salad; it was 1,200 calories for a salad. Half your daily calories in a salad, and I was like, okay, but I want to have dinner tonight.
That's absurd.
What am I going to eat? Like the burgers were like 2,000 calories, and I'm like, how is this
Just like
possible?
drowning in seed oil.
Well, that's the thing. How is it exactly? How is this possible? They literally just pump seed oil into it,
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so no wonder Americans are, often
Yeah.
massive.
This has just occurred to me, but I think, what that is, it basically is the, America is a liberal project. That's basically the liberal attitude to food, where everything is just to the most extreme possible. Whereas
A mixture of
English
seed oil
traditional
and
food,
corn syrup is
one
not a
thing,
good
as I said, that's a
mix.
nutritious meal, and that's because it's not been sort of produced in a factory. That's a recipe that's been handed
Oh,
down.
yeah, someone's made that.
Yeah.
I mean, calling it a recipe might be going a bit far.
Maybe. Hey.
But I tell you what, man, like people, foreigners watching this, I'm telling you, right, mash up those potatoes, mix the mince and gravy into it. That is actually good,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to hear otherwise.
Lovely. So anyway, if we move on to the
Just
next
call it
page,
shepherd's
a
pie.
Vice article. talking about foreigners who were shocked by British food. So, John, if we can just scroll through this very quickly, I'll keep it brief, but just look at some of the stuff that is said, because I find it deeply offensive.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that looks like a crap pie.
Well, yeah, but I mean...
But it's from Greg's.
Yeah, it's Greg's. John, if we could just scroll down.
I love this. Foreigners went to Greg's and they're like, oh my god, British food. That's not the same thing as the British food.
So this chap here, I still don't understand the purpose of gravy.
What?
I don't really understand that criticism. Like,
the purpose of gravy is to provide moisture and taste to the rest of the meal.
bring it all together.
I mean, if you're having vegetables...
If you ever cooked, you'd understood, like, oh, I've got all this stuff left over from cooking my meat. What shall I do with it? You make a gravy with it, you dickhead.
But the fat from the meat into the gravy, and oh my god, it's so good.
Unreal.
Yeah, exactly. And then put that on your vegetables, and it's so good.
Yeah, so, you want to boil the bones, make a nice stock.
If you've got the
add a little
time, I
wine.
mean,
Oh my god.
I'm hungry now.
Yeah. That into the ready mix. But
well, I did that sort of thing when I was at university because I was like, I've got so much free time.
Well,
I'm just going to make bone broth and this sort of thing.
Oh, that's
good
great.
fun.
Yeah.
So here, people put curry sauce on everything. I mean,
do we?
No, but I mean,
put it on chips.
Yeah, curry sauce has its place, sure.
Oh, yeah, on chips.
Yeah, and the next one, John. You put meat in a lot of pastries.
Yes.
Criticism. That's delicious.
That's good advertising.
Yeah.
And also, she's a pretty Belgian lady.
And the next one.
I'm happy looking at her face.
So much cheddar cheese and everything. Just Chad, yes.
Yeah, why is that bad?
And again, let's keep going through these. It's normal. Okay, so this one I wasn't so sure about. Do you eat crisps for breakfast?
I don't really eat crisps.
That is not a Frenchman.
It's not that I have a particular aversion to them.
Yeah.
They've never been my food of choice.
Yeah, it's coming from a Frenchman, so I am going to say, like, yes, I do eat crisps in the morning. What of it?
Yeah.
And again, I think
it's
the next one's the last one, John.
Your sausage rolls are not very nice.
Breakfasts are also peculiar.
Yeah.
Like, sorry,
Sorry, criticism of cuisine coming from the
Fashionably, the giant lack of spice always repulsed me. The way you shit in the street repulses me.
But it's also
fucking
like,
disgusting
so
savage.
You have dessert in the morning.
Yeah.
Like, you literally have dessert for breakfast,
Yeah.
so don't complain to me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, anyway.
This person, the general lack of spice has always repulsed me.
Yes, average Indian opinion.
I mean, come on, like, again, just the attitude that, and I don't know, sure, this is a cultural thing.
It is absolutely a cultural.
But the attitude that food has to be, again, it's always spicy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't use rotting food, so we don't need to douse it in
I like
spice.
spicy food, right?
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, it's not my go-to. I would always.
You absolute product of
genuinely love
incest.
food, so
Yeah,
that's
me too,
my
yeah.
go-to.
Yeah. Mine's a roast dinner.
Yeah, that's my number one.
Honestly,
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is like, okay, you're an Indian. You're like, okay, well, obviously everything you eat is like mouth-burning spice.
Yeah.
Well, no wonder you don't like English food.
Yeah.
Like,
Dysentery
your
and mouth-burning
taste
spice, yes.
is towards that and nothing else. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
You know?
But anyway, moving on. So I think the attitude that we're talking about among the kind of indigenous English people who are likely to, these kind of metropolitan types who regard English food as being unsophisticated. I think it does come down to that basic oikophobia that we always rail against.
I mean, unsophisticated is a charge I'm willing to receive. You know? Like, mince and gravy and potatoes is not sophisticated. It's not that it's not good. But I'm happy to be.
It's unpretentious.
But it's, I mean, again, I just don't understand why something has to be complicated to be good, right?
It doesn't.
And why it has to have so many extraneous ingredients to cover up the fact that it doesn't have an intrinsic flavour of its own.
Yeah.
Because that's what this is. All spicing is a coat.
Yes.
It is a massive coat because your food sucks.
Yeah.
That's why.
Ingredient quality. Because you think, you get a forkful like of a roast and you've got potato, gravy, carrot, meat on there. All that's a complex combination of flavours, right? It doesn't have to be like this sort of, like the street food ideal of central London, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and the things I also know is cooked in hygienic conditions.
Oh, there's also that.
Like, honestly though, I'm totally convinced it's just a massive coat.
Yeah.
But our food, I mean, look at the stringy lamb or something. Okay, I'm going to need spices on that. Yeah, I would need spices on that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Something else, but there's also the attitude that if British or English food is not good, then it doesn't even exist, right? The charge is always, tea is from China, fish and chips is actually, it's like from immigrant communities and so on.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to point out the fact, because I'm sure you've talked about this before, that something doesn't necessarily have to be sort of from here to be a tradition. Because tea is not from here as such.
She isn't from India.
Yeah, but it's
People try that.
yeah. But it's a habit. You know, it's a habit of the English to drink tea. Therefore, it's a tradition.
Exactly. It's not where the thing comes from. It's
Oh
the
yeah,
people
croque monsieur
who
is
do
quite
it.
nice.
For example, if fish and chips is Jewish, but they don't eat fish and chips in Israel.
Well,
so what
exactly,
what now? You
Yeah.
know? So it's anyway. So
Yeah.
you're exactly right. It's about what the people of this place do.
Yes.
Not where the ingredient comes from. Trade isn't.
Yeah. But I just want to move on then with that in mind. Just very, very briefly go through some of the history of English food because it's really nice. So this here, you can look at this. The links in the show notes. This is
The
the oldest
oldest-
cookbook in the English
yes.
language. So it's in
1390.
1390.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. So it was produced by the master chefs of King Richard II.
Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of people that believe in that meme, but oh, no, I can't use the that drop. Yeah. Oh, what? Nobody before thought, oh, shall we batter this food and fry it and see what it's like?
And it's written in Middle English. And I thought we'd just listen. If we can have the next one, John. I thought we'd just listen to this translation because it's just. I mean, it's always nice to listen to some Middle English. But,
It's so old it needs a modern translation.
yeah. So if we listen to this, then.
This form of curry is compiled of the chief master cooks of King Richard II after the conquest of England. By assent, let's move this up, by assent of masters of physique and of philosophy.
What could that mean?
Let me just translate that for you. So it says this method of curry.
You don't
this
need to
method of
translate
cooking
it.
Is compiled by the chief master cooks of King Richard II after the conquest of England, by assent of masters of physic, so that would be medical practitioners, and of philosophers, and by philosophers.
So there we are.
Well, just as a point here, one of the reasons this is masters of medicine, physicians, philosophers, is because your diet in pre-modern times was understood to be directly connected to your health.
Yeah.
And if you had
Imagine that.
Yeah, I know. Imagine that.
Yeah.
And if you had an ailment of some sort, they would prescribe a different kind of diet.
Yeah.
And this is ancient. This, the ancient Greeks did this. Medieval people did this. This is just well known throughout all of history that what you eat affects your well-being.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's literally.
Moderns can't handle that.
Yes. I mean, it's absurd to think that anything other than that is true.
How could there be a direct connection between the things I put in my body and the health of my body?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just insane.
It's wild.
But anyway, I wanted to illustrate the fact that, English cuisine does have a very long history, recorded history as well. Because in this book, I mean, I think it's like something like 158 recipes. And as I said, they're the recipes of King Richard II's master chefs. So it is quite decadent stuff, quite extravagant, a lot of it.
I'm gonna have to look at this now.
It's brilliant. I mean, I've put a link to this video. So this is the video that was taken. It's really good. This guy going through this book. But some of the more extravagant dishes include the use of heron, swan, whale, crane, and porpoise meat. So not stuff that you'd see today.
Yeah.
But
I won't try that.
yeah, but in general, it is a lot of it is very similar to what we eat today. It's a lot of sort of roasted, stuffed meats, kind of balancing of sweet and sour flavours, and stews, all that sort of thing. And again, this is 1390 that this is going back to. So, as we move through time, we see the kind of the development of what we today understand as English cuisine. So in the 15th and 16th centuries, it's kind of a continuation. Again, it's the roasted meats, the stews, broths, sweet and sour flavours, and also the addition of butter and local herbs as like staple ingredients, which again is very much still the case today. And then pies are introduced around the Tudor period. Again, you
Can't
think,
argue with the pie.
I mean, with Greggs we just saw, still eating pie. There's fast food chains based around the pie.
Yeah.
And then again, 17th century, we see broadly the same themes, with cookbooks containing recipes for roasted meats, soups, stews, sweet and savoury pies. And we also see some French influences kind of becoming quite mainstream at this time. And also this is when tea and hot chocolate are introduced to England.
Oh yeah, there would be.
James Woodford's Diary of a Country Parson, it gives quite a good idea of the sort of food eaten in England in the 18th century. by those who were reasonably well off. So he says, to welcome some neighbours on the 8th of June 1781, he gave them for dinner a couple of chicken boiled and a tongue, a leg of mutton boiled and capers, and batter pudding for the first course. Second, a couple of ducks roasted and green peas, some artichokes, tarts and blancmange. After dinner, almonds and raisins, oranges and strawberries, mountains and port wines. Peas and strawberries, the first gathered this year by me. So again, you see
Sounds
the
like an
focus.
amazing meal.
Sounds fantastic. That's a banquet right there. But again, the tremendous focus on high quality ingredients, meats, you know, nice quality stuff. Again,
He's talking about
yeah,
blancmange.
it's
It's,
gathered by me.
Yeah.
You know, local.
Like,
I
literally,
think
like,
blancmange is just egg white and sugar.
That's just wonderful. It's just
It's a
brilliant.
good base for
And
putting
the
a
Sunday
fruit
roast
compote on
was also
top of.
formalised in the late 1700s. So during the Industrial Revolution.
These aren't sparks, they're resistant mechs.
As they got ready for church. And then they would add
resistance
vegetables,
mechs.
potatoes, parsnips and so on. Before going to church on the Sunday morning. And then when they got back, it was ready to go. And as you said, they'd take the fat off, put it in the broth, and have that as gravy and pour it over the top. And that's the Sunday dinner, the Sunday roast. And again, that's a really, I think people forget this. That's a really nutritious, well-rounded meal.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not been derived through nutritional science. That's the knowledge passed down through generations. That this is what a square meal looks like.
There's also a ritual to it. Like there's definitely a ritual of the Sunday dinner in England, in English families. Like the whole family gets around to a massive feast, basically.
Yeah.
We've got a massive meal, and everyone is bloated, and then just spends the rest of the afternoon dozing.
Yeah, just wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the best way to spend your Sunday afternoon.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, I was lucky enough to grow up with that as it's a very staple
same.
thing in my family that we do that. And also, there's something else. Again, this is something that I was never. My parents instilled this in me because they're just fairly traditional people. But mealtime as being an important. It's when the family comes together. It's when sort of you talk about your day, talk about what's going on in your life. Because I mean, especially in the modern world, we don't have a lot of opportunity.
Yorkshire puddings are nice, but I really like toad in the hole because all the delicious meat juices from the sausage go in the toad in the hole.
So the 19th century sees the sort of widespread formalisation of English cooking through lots of, and this is when you get like celebrity chefs becoming a thing.
They can actually produce cookbooks.
Yes.
Reprinted and...
That's right, yeah, so there's lots of best-selling cookbooks, like, for example, Mrs. Beeton's Cookery Book, which is just a lovely name, and that's where this image is from, showing what a proper English desserts should look like.
So my wife is trying to practice her cooking, and she's baking. Yeah, I know. Yeah. And I might get her some classic cookbooks just to see.
Well, I'm thinking about picking some up because again, a lot of what I eat is English anyway. But it would be really nice to have some really nice copies of these books. And so then we move into the 20th century where English eating takes quite a dramatic turn, as you can imagine. So the American influence begins to take root, like the cancer that it is.
Sorry, American friends.
And the sort of more traditional foods are replaced with kind of instant foods in jars and cans. Spam, for example, dried cereals replaced bacon and eggs and porridge as breakfast foods. And obviously, we also see the introduction of refrigerators, which is another big factor in diet. Then, of course, there are the two wars and rationing, which significantly reduced a lot of the ingredients, the availability of a lot of the ingredients used in traditional foods, especially eggs, butter, sugar, flour, etc. And so, English food, English cuisine changes quite a lot. What's being eaten en masse changes quite a lot. And then, of course, we move into the 21st century, which, if you look at mainstream popular culture, English cuisine is understood as being basically kebabs, American fast food chains, curries, foreign.
Yeah. And that's literally like, and any restaurant is a foreign restaurant.
And again, back to what we were talking about at the start. So many, it's amazing how the sort of the pro-immigration types, they will always cite food as being like one of the primary reasons to not have a border.
But we can have a recipe book.
Yeah, literally.
We can translate it to English.
Yeah. Have you heard of this thing called import and export?
Have you heard of this thing called movable type?
Yeah. But anyway, so that's where we are, English cuisine in the 21st century. It has been broadly, again, in the mainstream consciousness, I think, replaced with foreign food. as with so many others.
But this all looks great.
But yeah, no. So I wanted to finish off just with some, some good, hearty, wholesome stuff here. So there was this trend going on. It was a few weeks ago I saw this, but it was just people saying, "Thank God I'm from wherever," and the English ones will always look the best. I mean, John, if we can go through some of these pictures here, lovely beef Wellington, pie, just beautiful.
I mean, that was
Yeah.
I love beef.
And again, it's not particularly sophisticated. It's a handful of ingredients.
Beef Wellington is sophisticated.
Yeah. Yeah, if we can go on, just wonderful.
I tell you what, following the breakfast.
Yeah, I mean,
That looks
I eat bacon and eggs basically every morning.
Yeah.
But it'll give you cancer.
Oh, fuck yeah, bring
Wrong.
cancer.
Incorrect.
I don't care if we get cancer.
I'm not being.
I'm resigned to it.
Yeah, and I genuinely.
I'm not giving up bacon and eggs
Yeah.
to avoid cancer.
Well, I believe that nutritional science, a lot of it. I mean, I'm going to sound like a bit of a kook maybe. I think a lot of it is just wrong because I think
Well,
that
a lot of it has been.
Yeah.
I mean, like they were saying, oh, fat was the problem.
Yeah.
Turns out no,
Incorrect.
sugar.
Yeah. But if you, I think that,
Yeah,
not
Keith
fat,
Lloyd's my
saturated
favourite.
fats as well.
I
Yeah.
learned a lot of my cooking
And
watching
eggs
his
as well,
stuff.
stigmatised for the longest time. It's like they cause heart disease. No.
yeah. Well, on saturated fat, breast milk is 50% saturated
Yeah.
fat. Okay.
But,
You know.
but there's never any word about seed oils.
No.
I mean, I've been radicalised by seed oil propaganda.
Yes.
Which I don't know if it's true, but I want it to be true. So I'm going to believe it.
I just think that the best source, and this is Oakshotty and this is Berkeley,
Yeah.
and I think the best source of knowledge for this sort of thing is not what some scientist is telling you in a study.
It's the practice of it.
It's looking at what we have been eating for the last 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And then thinking, okay,
Eggs.
people were all
Really?
right?
For me, actually, it's the industrial process of the thing.
Yes.
Because I'm actually very skeptical about all of this now, and I've come to the point where actually I'd like the raw ingredient
Yes.
to make my own food, so
Yeah.
I know precisely what is in there,
Well,
what isn't. You know.
I caused a little bit of controversy in the comments when I was on the podcast with Josh a month or two ago, because I said that I quite unashamedly believe in far more stringent regulation around food, using the state to regulate food, because I'm not liberal, I don't have a problem using the state.
Yeah.
Because I think that a supermarket should basically consist of what I call single ingredient
Raw
foods.
ingredients.
Yeah,
Yeah.
meat, veg, and so on.
Yeah.
And not this American BS that we see, where it's got, you look at the ingredients and it's like a million different things that you can't even
Yeah.
pronounce.
What are the chemicals
Yeah.
that are in my food?
Exactly.
You know, I thought I was buying just bacon.
Yeah.
Now there's currently there's loads of things I have no idea what they are.
Yeah. And to me, it's just an unvarnished good to have everyone be healthier, frankly.
Well,
But my choice.
yeah.
I just don't agree with that.
Yeah, no, it was your choice until we had an NHS. Now it's not
Yes.
your choice. I'm paying for it.
Yeah.
So shut up. I'm not having this, right? But no,
Yeah.
seriously, though, I've come to the conclusion that the fewer processing procedures
Yeah.
your food has to go through, the better for you it will be.
Well, that should be obvious.
I've got no proof for this,
Yeah.
but I'm just convinced that this is the case. I'm not
Yeah.
going to be convinced otherwise.
Source, trust me, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it came to me in a dream, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
So, John, why don't we'll just take a look at these last couple of tweets here, just because it's nice. This account's really good, by the way. You should
Oh.
follow them. Tom Bombadil's the coach.
I do love good bread as well, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Freshly baked, bloomer bread.
Yes. Oh,
So
yes.
tiger bread is so good.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Do not like
Boundless,
tiger bread.
Wonderful.
That is a Dutch
And we'll go on to the
invention,
next one.
and it is terrible.
Yeah. Just again.
I haven't had any
one-
breakfast.
Yeah. Beautiful. So I'm going to finish up now. I'll conclude with just a quick thought, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll keep it brief. But I do think that the traditional attitude to food is just the best all round. It's the healthiest. It's the most even like environmentally conscious, right? If you buy from local farms and you support local farms, there's a whole regenerative process to farming. People, a lot of people my age regard farming as being this purely damaging thing to the environment, but that's just an absolutely nonsense propaganda line, right?
Yes.
And I do actually think that, as I said, I did the carnivore diet for like a year, so I was literally only eating raw dairy, meat, and eggs for a year, and it was great. I had a great time. I was the fittest I've ever been. And I know, do you still do keto?
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate those diets, right? I do appreciate the aim, because I know you have become more healthy as a result.
Oh
of
yeah,
it.
women.
And well done for that, because it's very admirable. But I do think that those sorts of diets, where it is the kind of imposition of a set of rules to your diet, That is quite, again, what Oakeshott would call
It's quite
rationalistic.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
But because I do think that a traditional attitude to food, as anything, is, I don't know, will just yield a better result. Because I tend to eat, again, I just tend to eat English food.
Dutch
I
crunch.
have bacon for breakfast. I have
Yeah,
roasted
well,
meats and vegetables.
it's
I don't
bread,
go too
and you've
crazy
put
with
rice
spices
starch on
sauces
it, and that's why it
'cause I
has
just
the
think
crunch.
That's kind of the
I
healthiest
am.
way to
I
be,
do,
based on the
ugh,
fact
do not like
that
it.
There's 1,000 years of history.
Give me
before
rye bread or
You've got
black
another
or
precedent.
black
Yeah.
bread.
Yeah,
That's
Again,
good
the kind of
stuff.
collective stock of wisdom,
Yeah.
as but
My problem is essentially living in the modern world. It's convenience.
Yes.
You know, I'm really busy
Yeah.
all the time.
And that is don't get me wrong. I recognise that it can come across as quite sort of bourgeois and out of touch.
No. It's not even that. It's.
I'm looking at the time because I want to
have the kind of lifestyle
get,
that I'm in the case.
Yeah.
But
I wanna get
unfortunately, in the modern
going.
world, It's hard to have that kind
Yeah.
of lifestyle.
Which is why I personally don't have an issue using the state to make it so that it is the
We'll
case
do
that
this
everybody
mission,
eats in that.
then the final mission will probably
So
be
there we are,
sometime
English
this
food.
week.
Very, very
Not
good.
sure
Don't listen to
exactly
the
when,
propaganda.
but it will be
Going
this
to
week.
roast
I'll do the
traditional
final
English food is
mission.
brilliant. What they're calling English food now, it's not. Anyway.
Thank you for watching that segment from the podcast for the Lotus Eaters. If you enjoyed, why not visit our website?
Yes, I did enjoy it, Big Ears. Thank you very much for asking me. I like Big Ears. I think he's all right. But anyway, I have the hunger hiccups, so I'm going to finish the game there. Yeah. I do want my tea, or dinner as I like to think of it as. So we'll save this mission for another time. Thanks everyone for joining me. Thanks for watching the videos which I watch with me. I enjoy a mixture of engineering and don't know what you call the other stuff. Local Swindon news. Yeah, local. I enjoy updates of local Swindon news and engineering. So I'll make the save there. Do this mission. And then final mission sometime this week. So it's been good, but now I'm asking you to go away.